Thank you so much for coming here. I know it's busy lately, and it's awesome that you guys have given your time to this important issue and to come have a discussion with us about fracking, which is definitely really important, especially where we live. If you haven't already noticed, there are sandwiches at the front. They've been moderately decimated, but there's still some left if you're hungry. Free food, always a nice bonus. So I am Heather Bromsky. I work with the CU Environmental Center with a team called the CU Assembly for Sustainability and Equity, or CU ACE if you don't want to handle the full mouthful. And we basically work to show the CU community and the Boulder community in general that environmental issues and social justice issues are deeply intertwined and often kind of the same thing, and that gets a lot of times forgotten, and the two movements don't necessarily collaborate enough, which can be a really big problem. And so we are a part of the CU Environmental Center, which was established in 1970 on Earth Day, when students decided that they wanted to have recycling on campus. And so they started a really cool movement to try to get campus to recycle, and that grew and grew, and so now we're one of the oldest, most established, and most successful environmental movements on campuses in the country and in the world. We now employ around 100 student staff members. We have student board of directors that direct a lot of what we do, and so we're really proud to be part of that. This event is also co-sponsored by Fossil Free CU. We're here today. Kim here is representing Fossil Free CU on our panel, so you'll hear from her a little bit more. So I would like to introduce our panelists, so we can kind of see who we're talking to. And then we're going to open up the room for questions from all you guys. So you can ask anything that you feel interested in or anything like that. You can ask them in general or direct it at individual panelists. And I'll walk around with this microphone to make sure you can be heard. And if you don't want to ask your question, if you want to ask it anonymously, then we have a basket of little pieces of paper and pens that you can put your question in, and we will make sure to get those answered as well. So, first, I guess I'll start at that end to introduce everyone. We have Cliff Wilming from the Colorado Community Rights Network, and he is father of two, registered nurse and a resident of Lafayette, and he's a co-founder of the of East Boulder County United, which worked to successfully pass an amendment in Lafayette to grant community rights and ban fracking. So that's really cool, and now he's an organizer for the Colorado Community Rights Network, which is trying to get an initiative on the ballot next election, not this one that's happening right now, but the next one, to guarantee community rights in Colorado and ensure that communities can protect themselves against harmful environmental and business practices. Welcome Cliff Wilming to our panel. Next we have Suzanne Spiegel, and she is a campaign director and grassroots organizer for Frack Free Colorado. And over the past 2 years, she's been involved in organizing in communities throughout the Front Range who've achieved bans and moratoria on fracking. And she believes that the fracking problem in the U.S. is a catalyst for a human rights movement that ultimately reasserts human rights over corporate interests. So welcome, Suzanne, to our panel. Next we have Patty Limerick, who is a faculty director and chair of the board for the Center of the American West at the University of Colorado, where she's also a professor of history. And Professor Limerick and CU Law professor Charles Wilkinson founded the Center of the American West, and since 1995 it's been her primary point of affiliation. And she's also been a part of Fracking Sense, a series of talks about natural gas development and its impact on the West. She spoke on the topic of natural gas development in the big picture of the Western extractive industry. And she's an established scholar and an amazing mind who has dedicated her career to bridging the gap between academics and the general public, and to demonstrating the benefits of applying historical perspectives to contemporary problems. So please welcome Patty Limerick to the panel. Next we have Sam Kaiser, who is a senior at CU, double majoring in environmental studies and ecology and evolutionary biology. And he is the director of sustainability for CU student government. And he works with the administration, the environmental center, and student groups to try to improve campus energy and water conservation. He's also the chair of a CU government Student Government Commission think tank that's working towards drafting legislation towards increasing CU's renewable energy portfolio. And he's also working on an honors thesis about coral reef resource management and strategy for marginalized communities in Zanzibar. So please welcome Sam Kaiser to the panel. And lastly here we have Kim Strong, who is a student at CU Boulder in the philosophy and creative writing departments. Their preferred gendered pronouns are they, them, and theirs. And Kim is a member of Fossil Free CU and is passionate about social and environmental justice. They're a fantastic student dedicated to gender justice, social awareness, and climate equity. So please welcome Kim Strong to the panel. So now I would love to let each of the speakers kind of introduce themselves and their perspective on the issue a little bit. They can probably do a better job talking about themselves than I can. So I'll hand it over to Cliff Wilming to begin, and we'll work our way down, and then we're going to open it up to questions for all you guys.
Can I stand up? Is that too formal?
Stand up.
I'll stand up. Okay. Can everybody hear this okay? All right, so you heard from the introduction, my name is Cliff Wilming. I live in Lafayette, Colorado. I'm a registered nurse. So when we start getting into the topic of hydraulic fracturing, and we start talking about fighting for health, welfare, and safety in neighborhoods, fighting the most powerful industry in the world, this is really something I do as a hobby versus a career. And actually, about 3 years ago, if you would have asked me about hydraulic fracturing, community rights, corporate law, all this kind of stuff, I would have probably glazed over and not know what you were talking about. Really, my introduction to fracking has really been through force. Because about 5 years ago, my family and I, we moved out here from Chicago to get away from pollution and political corruption. We failed, totally, to do that. And yeah, one day I was reading the local paper out there in Lafayette, the Hometown Weekly, and I found an article written about women in Erie, Colorado that were protesting the development of an 8-well pad right outside of their elementary school, Red Hawk Elementary. Being from Chicago and moving to Colorado, I wasn't really used to suburbanites protesting. So it immediately piqued my interest, and I found out very quickly that we actually live on a shale. And I went down the rabbit hole of hydraulic fracturing and have not looked back ever since. Tonight we're talking about fracking burdens, who pays the price. And I was trying to think about this, and when I was considering this topic here, you immediately kind of go to quantifying. Essentially, we've got this enormous industry that is now very, very interested in our state. They've been well developed here. There's over 50,000 wells in Colorado now. And like any good industry, what these folks are going to want to do is they're going to want to internalize as much profit as possible and externalize as much of the burden or socialize as much of the cost. So, you immediately start to do these weird calculations like, how much, does asthma, that disease, carry with it in terms of an entire population of a state when we're talking about added ozone, this sort of thing. Neurotoxins, how much deficiency do health problems cost the entire state. This is something that my mind kind of goes to as an RN. How much does an admission to an oncology ward cost? So you start thinking like an accountant, which to me is quite strange. In fact, in Boulder County, just a couple of years ago, maybe about a year and a half ago, the Boulder County Commissioners they commissioned a study to determine how much this would cost the people of Boulder County to our roads alone. And I did a bizarre calculation. So right now they're considering having about 1,800 wells in Boulder County. They calculated that each well would take about 3,600 truck trips in order to develop that well. If you average the size of a semi to be 70 feet, I did a lot of research to find that out, the amount of semis it's going to take to develop Boulder County's oil and gas reserves, if you lined them up bumper to bumper, they would encircle the equator twice. That's how many truck trips just for Boulder County. That's 1,800 wells. Out in Weld County, there's 22,000 right now. So that to me seems to get perverse, to be honest. And, out in Lafayette, when we started to do these kind of calculations, we concluded one thing. Fracking is really bad, and we don't really want it. So the problem is, what the heck do you do about it? Because, another calculation is you're immediately going against the most powerful industry in the world. They probably don't take no for an answer. And so you kind of go through a series of approaches to this. And really, you can kind of go about this question in two different ways. Has everybody here seen The Matrix, by the way? I think a few guys have. Good. Good, that's important. Well, you can take the blue pill, and here's how the thought process of the blue pill works. Fracking produces natural gas, which is a bridge fuel to a fossil fuel-free world. And we can't go about just transitioning ourselves to 100% renewables right now. So fracking has to happen, but it has to be done safely, and it needs to be safely regulated, and the concerns of the citizens have to be listened to. And this is a process should be taken up by legislators and the sincere communication with their communities so that we can develop this cooperatively and safely. The red pill is different. The thought process of the red pill starts off like this. We're fucked. And what do I mean when I say we're fucked? What I mean is, when you start to go about saying no to fracking, what you find yourself in is an absolute labyrinth of corporate law. Because guess what? You don't have the right to say no to it. You don't have the right to protect your health and welfare and safety. You don't have the right to protect your kids. And this is something that as a seasoned political activist, I didn't really know. I was actually pretty naive. I actually had drank the Kool-Aid that thought that we lived in a free society, and that all we had to do is provide enough political pressure to our politicians, and things would tend to work out. I was completely wrong on that. Because when you start to say no to things like fracking, you start to go down an absolutely programmed series of logic. Because there are corporate laws that have been written for 200 years to make sure that people, maybe I'm confusing corporations and people right now. Corporations can go out and take what they need out of the land, out of the soil, out of the air, out of the people, out of the labor, and they can appropriate that stuff onto themselves. And if you try to stop them, you immediately run into all kinds of stuff. Is everybody here familiar with how busy the Colorado Oil and Gas Association has kept the Front Range communities here? Has anybody here heard about the lawsuits that are going on? Okay. Lafayette is one community that is currently being sued by the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. We're not the only one, and the first one was actually Greeley way back in 1992. But we are among the latest. Longmont's another one, Fort Collins is another one, and Boulder will be anytime soon. So this is kind of how we've experienced it. You say no to fracking, you get sued because guess what? The state is saying that oil and gas development, like all sorts of other industries, is the property of the state. And of course, the state is influenced by the dominant industry, which is oil and gas. There's more, there's mining, there's all kinds of stuff like that. GMOs, injection wells, all that kind of stuff all falls under the same corporate legal system. And so in dealing with fracking, or trying to say no to it, what you need to do, or what we have found out that you need to do in Lafayette, is you need to start disobeying the law. And that's exactly what we did. When we invoked the Lafayette Community Rights Amendment and we took it to a vote, the law itself was written to take away corporate personhood rights, to ban fracking, to ban industrial waste, to go after all of those corporate laws that pigeonhole these communities. And Lafayette is not the first. There's been over 200 communities that have enacted community bills of rights that are essentially a form of legal civil disobedience to drive legal change upward. We can't stop at Lafayette. We have gone upward and formulated and texted a statewide ballot initiative called the Colorado Community Rights Amendment. It's probably the most strong state ballot initiative that has been initiated in Colorado for some time, and it's absolutely historic. So I'm just going to kind of end there. Because we've got these other panelists here, and I just kind of wanted to open up with that kind of blue pill and red pill analogy because I think it serves the conversation well. Thank you.
Suzanne Spiegel, and I just want to start by saying it's incredibly refreshing to be having a discussion like this where the majority of the room is under 40. It is so rare. So thank you all for showing up. It means so much. And right now, this year, one of my missions is to work with more people around my age, because I feel like the millennials understand without question the paradigm that we're in, and we know that we feel in our gut that something is wrong with it. I think that we've been trained to believe, though, that we don't have any power in it, and so we distract ourselves with our other things, and I was awesome at that until a couple of years ago. So I want to tell you a little about my story and how I came into this work. So historically, standing in front of you all would have been absolutely mortifying. I hated speaking in front of people, and I didn't really like questioning things publicly either. I was raised and allowed to do that, but I think culturally I was kind of trained to just fit in and get along and be good at the things that you're supposed to be good at. So I went through high school and I did that. I got good grades and I played on the sports teams and I was the good girl. And there was a moment in my life that was a big turning point that kind of illuminated what I was doing in that pattern of just shutting up and fitting in. And I'm from New York, and right around the time of 9/11, there was a big ripple that went through my school. A lot of people were impacted. Their families had been in the building, or friends of their families had been in the building. The TVs were on at the school. So for weeks afterwards, there was a lot of tension in the air. And I remember I was walking down the hall one day, and as I was walking down, there were two people also walking down the hall. One of them was kind of the most obnoxious person at the school that I could think of. Just that guy that always had to be center of attention and kind of just an ass to people around him. The second person walking down the hall was a Muslim girl that was wearing a burqa and couldn't be more quiet and kind of reserved and just to herself. And so the three of us walked down the hall at the same time. And I swear this is relevant to fracking, it will come around. So as that happened, he turned to her and he said, "Get out of here, you terrorist." He said, "You're not welcome here." And in my freaking gut, I can still feel the anger that I felt that day. I still feel so much rage about that moment. And when that happened, inside of me, everything was exploding to defend her and to say something. And I went to lunch instead. I didn't. I said nothing. And it was one of those pivotal moments that I realized, where the hell is my voice? Like that, I couldn't have been more emotionally charged in that moment, but I did absolutely nothing. And for every single year since it happened, I replayed it at least once, like what I would have done, what I would have said, how I could have been strong for that quiet girl. And I couldn't replay it, and it was a low moment, like a shameful moment for me in my life. And so when I moved to Boulder, it was like very much a blossoming place, as it is, I think, for a lot of us that move here. You know, we come into this place and we fall in love with this state and everything that it has to offer. And for me, it was meeting all these people from different backgrounds, and I was able to break out of that kind of mold that I'd been in. And after I graduated, I came to see you, and I went through studying international affairs here. And after I graduated, I was living here and working here. And I remember one morning I was reading out of the Boulder Weekly, and I was reading that the 3 county commissioners that are like our local politicians here in Boulder County were getting ready to allow our moratorium on fracking to expire. Okay, I had heard this much about fracking, enough to know that it was something to be alarmed about, but I was definitely so far from an expert. But when I read it, something happened. It was that same explosive reaction within me, like a very emotional and offended response, like, who is making this decision? Why am I not invited to this talk? Like, fracking in Boulder County. I know the people of Boulder County. I know this is not the sentiment here. I know that we wouldn't vote for this. So how is this going to happen? And I remember in that moment that I had a flashback to that other moment. Like it was a similar kind of rage that was in me. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to regret this time. I'm going to speak up. I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I made a decision in that moment that was it. I was going to act on this one, and I was going to see this one through, and I had no idea how. And the reason I bring this up is because we're on a panel here, you know, so it creates this structure of like, we know what we're talking about. But the thing is that I realized I didn't know anything about it. And it was just making that decision, okay, I'm going to do something. And I can't describe to you how quickly things started to happen once I made that decision. Over the course of the next, I guess it's been about 2 years since that happened, I've been involved in some grassroots movements that have been miraculous to any outsider that's looking at it. We've been told over and over again in the Front Range of Colorado that what we're doing in challenging the most powerful industry in the world is impossible, that we're being outspent 30-1, we have no shot, that we're going into communities that are too conservative to understand this. And every single time we hear this rhetoric coming in, it's wrong. It's just wrong. We have experienced victories that are stunning to everybody that's involved and everybody that's watching. And so over the past couple years, the first victory that we had was that Cliff and I actually worked together with a bunch of other grassroots organizers. And when I say grassroots organizers, it's really just people from their community who give a shit about their water and their air. So, you know, then we become organizers. And what it looked like was we went to our county commissioners and we begged that we went through the regulatory system that he was talking about, Cliff was talking about, and said, here's all the scientific studies about why you shouldn't frack. Here's all the health studies about why you shouldn't frack. Here's all of my sentimental reasons as a human about why we don't want this here. And we presented everything. And I was really naive to how little they were listening. I mean, I was like, oh, I'm gonna give this heartfelt talk and I'm gonna invite everyone I know and we're gonna get them to extend this moratorium. And what we learned is that it doesn't matter, that actually these 3 county commissioners, we live in what's called a statutory county. I didn't know any of this when I started. A statutory county means that our 3 county commissioners work for the state. They're employees of the state. They're not beholden to the people. So if the state says, we're gonna frack 1,800 wells in your county, guess what their job is? It's to implement that. That's the law. And so we were telling them to not do their job. Even though it was completely in the community's interest, that's what we were asking them to do. They decided not to extend the moratorium. Then we reacted by having an emergency community meeting at which we discussed massive civil disobedience as well as recalling some of them from office, which would have been a huge effort. There was some media attention about that. Guess what happened? Like 3 days later, they reversed their decision in Boulder County. That was a huge lesson because, like Cliff was just saying, sometimes we see this as a movement. So the difference is that, like any movement, there are 2 types of laws. There's human rights, natural rights, inalienable laws that we're born with, you know, our right to exist, our right to have the things we need to exist, like water and air. And then there's laws that are oppressive and that don't honor those basic laws. And so every human rights movement is about bringing up the tension or the conflict that exists between those 2. And so we think that right now we're in a time of a human rights movement because corporations are wielding so much power that our human rights have become secondary to their profit. And so I'm going to close real quick, but I'm going to tell you what's happening in the community because I want to invite all of you to come because here's the thing, is that this doesn't happen without us. There is no one that is protecting us. Neither one of our political parties is protecting us. All of them are receiving money from the oil and gas industry. So you can't depend on the political parties to do it. Secondly, even a lot of big environmental organizations are even receiving this money at a national level. If you want that article, I can give it to you. Okay, so there's no systematic protection. It really is and has to be a grassroots movement, just like movements of the past. So, oh, there it is. This is the article. So, I just want to tell you about a couple things that are happening right here that you can plug into. One is that Boulder County is working on becoming a home rule county. That means that we no longer are statutory. Our commissioners no longer have to answer just to the state. They become beholden to the people. The people of Boulder County then get to write laws, amend laws, nullify laws, and we get to write a community bill of rights under which we get to state our right to clean air, clean water, no chemical trespass, peaceful enjoyment of home, basic rights. Now, they probably will challenge us, but guess what happens when they challenge us? We're bringing the tension to the surface, just like every human rights movement does. The conversation is changing, and more people are getting involved. So that's one huge thing that you can do. The other thing is November 10th, this decision is coming back around. The moratorium on fracking in Boulder County is expiring. It will be over on December 31st. So January 1st, our open space will be open for trucks to start rolling in and fracking here. On November 10th, the county commissioners are announcing their intention to do whatever they're going to do. We can show up and, as a community, say our piece. I'm not promising that they will listen, but I think it's important that we're still there and that we are building this constantly. So that's November 10th at the Plaza Conference Center in Longmont, and it's at like Industrial Circle. So if you're interested in any of this, please write that down, November 10th. And if you want information about the home rule stuff, two things you can do. Tonight at this very same time, Wednesdays at 6:30, we meet every Wednesday to talk about this. We're circulating petitions. We're halfway to our goal. We need half more, so we've got a little over 10,000. We need about 9,000 more. And you can come to a meeting, plug in, become part of the movement. That's 6:30 p.m. at Unity Church every Wednesday night. Check out bccrn.org. You'll get all the info. Thanks, guys.
Can you repeat that website? Question?
Yes.
Can you write the website on the board?
Yes.
I want to second that notion that it is great to see young people. I spend my life, it seems, going to conferences where people are talking about natural resources and they're talking about the future of natural resources, and everybody in the room is over 50 and they were not going to be around for some spell of that future. So it is really a pleasure. And I will just say this, I hope this is not condescending, but the time that I have spent into trying to require students to go to public events and hear lectures, and if you come and write a 1 page, extra credit and so on, my guess is you're just here because you want to be here. Is that right? Well, there's a wonderful concept. And so I mean, that's totally great, because I've been so successful always in using these incentives. And so I am in an organization called the Center of the American West. I'm a co-founder and faculty director. We pursue, to the best of our ability, civil, respectful situations where people of opposing points of view can speak to each other and hear each other, and we try to work with scientists so that we are presenting evidence-based information, though that's become challenging because public attitudes are such that in this particular topic, and actually quite a number of environmental topics, it's a little bit hard to get around to having people listen to the scientific findings, because there has been a preliminary stage of deciding what to think of the scientists. Are they pro-industry? Are they anti-industry? And so frequently a study comes out and there might be like, I don't know what, about an hour and a half where it's just a study that we're going to look at, and then we get it categorized as pro-industry or anti-industry. And that's the last time that people really pay attention to the findings. I'm overstating a little bit, but it is a difficulty of what's called the doom and scientist problem. I am a historian, and so for me, the phrase environmental justice is full of rich and important meaning. And there were conferences in the 1980s and 1990s where people of color came together and said, there is something missing us in this environmental movement. The racial exclusiveness of a lot of the environmental movement. In fact, to this day, many of the major environmental groups are not places you go to see the full population of the United States. So I am was quite of an ancient person. I'm sorry, there's nothing to be done about it. I see one or two of my fellow old-timers around here, but I am of such an ancient category that, I don't know what, maybe 25 years ago, a man named Robert Bullard, who was one of the great theorists and practitioners of environmental justice, came to CU. And I told several of my students who were interested in that, we must get there very early. It was at the UMC, we must get there early, because it would be mobbed, and it wasn't. It was a pretty small crowd. But Robert Bullard, the king of environmental justice, I was in that same room many years ago when David Brower, the head of the Sierra Club, was there. And David Brower said to the audience, there were 800, 900 people there because he was a rock star of environmentalism. He said, I'm looking around the room, I only see white people. I'm really only seeing white people. What's going on here? I thought, wow, David Brower said that. It turns out when I got a chance to talk to Mrs. Brower afterwards, that they had, one of their children has a mixed family, and so they were alert, they were awakened. And so, anyway, so I have been hanging out for a long time on the edges, sometimes every now and then in the center with the tribes, pretty well involved with Indian tribes on these issues. So I am a fan of the whole movement of environmental justice. I'm also an armchair quarterback as an historian and as an observer of phenomena that I know will turn out to be historic and I know also are complex. This is where my pill, I've taken a pill and mine is multicolored and made of many dimensions. I have hung out in so many different circles that I went ahead and swallowed the pill of complexity. So, I'm screwed. I mean, speaking of that, I'm screwed. I can't say a single clear thing to save my life because it seems to me there's not, in many, many domains, there's just not clarity. Have you guys hung out with David Baumgarten? Okay. David Baumgarten is the Gunnison County attorney. He has made a life project of finding out what powers are available to local governments, cities and counties, municipalities, any kind, and he has an extraordinary range of things he has found, some of which have never been tested. People don't know that they're there. They're in the state statutes. They grant power to a locality. Locality doesn't know it's there, so it might as well not be there. So David Baumgarten is somebody who should be here. I would so happily yield my microphone and my lack of clarity on these issues to David Baumgarten. So there's that. There's also, for me, a bewildering historical situation that I don't struggle any great results on, but environmental justice, as I understood its origins, was about the exclusion of people of color and a corrective to that, and it was also then moving in a direction that, in fact, working class people of any background could be victimized in their environmental setting. So for me, the fracking controversies have been puzzling because the majority of the aggrieved people are white middle-class people. And that's not the category I had in my mind over the first 20 or 30 years of the environmental justice movement. That doesn't mean that white middle-class people can't be perfectly qualified as victims, but it does complexify the power thing. And it does as well because in this area, 1970s and 1980s, the worst environmental news to many very committed conservationists and long-term thinkers was the sprawl of the suburbs. The thing that was very agitating for people in this area was that the suburbs kept growing, and the fossil fuel subsidy for that was grim. The commuting, okay, so as an historian, you can see where the complexity pill just keeps screwing me up as a clear communicator. The place where I have clarity is with the tribes. Many Indian people, and this is a place where environmental justice is exactly the category to be looking at this. Tribal people, by and large, got reservations that white folks thought had no use for economic development. Places you couldn't farm, places white folks didn't want. So one long-term surprise or paradox of that was that the tribes, in a number of cases, have ended up with remarkable subsurface resources, subsurface mineral resources. Now that was nothing that the white folks in the 19th century intended to have happen. They thought they were taking the good places for themselves and giving the places nobody would want to the tribes. So now we have the Southern Ute people with a major set of resources in oil and gas, and to the point where there's a company, the Red Willow Company is a tribal company that is economically, it's not a casino. It's got, Red Willow just bought the big central part of Lakewood. It was the Bellevue, or whatever. It's a very big, very prosperous shopping district. And Red Willow and the Southern Ute own that now. So, for the tribes, the historical pattern by which their resources simply get taken away from them and they are driven further and further into poverty, that's still happening. Good heavens, that's still happening. But there are some very striking cases where having subsurface mineral resources are giving some tribes an economic opportunity and a chance to have young people go to college, to have young people in the tribe come back because there's a working economy. So, okay, so that's another dose of the complexity pill. There is still a prospect. Everyone must be alert to this. Everyone must be very aware of the fact that the pattern of ripping off Indian people is it's not taught in Jefferson County, we know that, but you can follow that controversy. But anyway, but it is an unquestionable part of history. In an unexpected way, energy resources, including natural gas, but also including wind, solar, those have turned out to be very important for the tribes. There's a new organization of tribes getting started. At least one CU student has joined me in visiting with those people, and it is actually, Addie Flager at CU is playing an incredibly important role in helping that group just keep records of what it's doing and where it's going. And I will just end with the fact that the ripping off of the tribes operated in a framework of really intolerable paternalism, of white folks telling Indian people what was good for them. So at this stage, when the Southern Utes are developing resources, and it's not just the Southern Utes, it's a number of other tribes, and they are actually reaching a level, I should say, the tribes can do something a county could never do, which is invest their revenue in a long-term fund. So that it's not just spend it down and balance the budget every year. They can actually invest for the future. So it's very different from what happens with a county where the revenue might come in briefly and then it's gone. So if I ever feel myself winding up for what would in my case be maternalism, I guess not paternalism, to think, well, I'm not sure that's really good for the tribes to be doing that. I just think, oh my Lord, I've developed a kinship with President Andrew Jackson and I don't like that. So it's a complicated world. I have been doing this Fracking Scent series for a couple of years. I have been hanging out in lots of different circles. I'm delighted to meet my comrades here, Cliff and Suzanne and Kim and Sam. I already knew Sam, but I'm delighted to meet him again. So I'm happy to have the conversation tonight, but I'm just stuck at having fully ingested and absorbed that complexity pill, and I have other bad symptoms that I can display for you of a complexity problem if you want to see that. So thank you very much for the chance to speak.
Hi. I am a student here at CU, like most of you, or hopefully like all of you right now. And I am a good example of a student that the university wants to attract. And also, I came to this university, in part, originally, because of its sustainability reputation. And a lot of universities are realizing across the country that this is one of the top issues that incoming freshmen are attuned to. There were studies done at ASU recently that 10% of the students who are attending CU's freshmen this year are attending solely because of sustainability reputation, and over 40% are attending in part because of sustainability reputation. And this is at ASU, in a desert, the least sustainable place ever. And students go there for its sustainability reputation. Well, good thing that we have a great sustainability reputation. Actually, we got 36th. The Sierra Club rankings, which are the primary means of ranking sustainable campuses, ranked us 36th last year after many other state schools. One of the areas where we lack points the most is in our commitment to renewable energy development and our commitment to renewable energy curriculum, and also our sustainable investment disclosure and our lack of commitment to renewable investments. So hopefully we will be able to go on a reputation for a while longer and hope that the freshmen aren't reading these reviews. So that's not very optimistic. But what is great is that you guys are all here right now to talk about the sustainability issue, to talk about fracking. I think it's hard enough to figure out which information you need to pay attention to in modern society. I struggle with it myself, especially when people out there are working to actually not, to get you misinformed, to make sure that information isn't there available to you. This is closely tied to the fracking issue. And also there are forces in the administration right now at our own university that would like you not to know all the things that we do with fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry. So I commend you for your commitment to discovering this information and coming here tonight. Of course, in the environmental major, we're learning that information by itself isn't enough. And you need committed people who are emotionally connected and can logically support these issues. So I am really excited to see what these people have to say tonight. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Kim Strong again. I'm also a student here at CU, and I feel in some way, opposing Sam, that I am the kind of student that CU does not want to attract, and that I am a very strong advocate against systems of power. I work with the W, which is the Women's Resource Center. We work a lot for women advocacy and helping out marginalized groups. So I feel like in a way, sometimes I get a little obnoxious with just how much pro this sort of disintegration of these systems I can be, but I just want to go into a little story of what got me interested in this kind of stuff, fracking in particular. I grew up in a poor rural place in Franktown, Colorado. Everyone knows that. Well, I was on a street, and we were the first house on the street, and there were a bunch of industrial plants kind of going down this street, and we had our own well water and all this stuff. We had a low income. It was just my mother supporting 3 kids. And I find fracking interesting because of the weight it places on lower income families. So I know for me personally, there were times when our water would just go brown and we couldn't drink it, or bathe in it, or do anything with the water, and just how much that affected my life personally, being as my intersections of class. And so I think going off of what was said earlier about you not having the right to protect your family, and not having the resources available to fight these large companies that are doing these sort of things to you because of who you are or the kind of income you have. And I think that's particularly infuriating, I think, to me, myself, having gone through this experience of not being able to get anyone to advocate for what's happening on my own property, and also just kind of the disempowerment it gives to citizens who this is affecting, whereas my mother is supporting all these children and just trying to do the best she can, and then to be able to not help with something that's completely out of her control. And so that sort of intersection I think is very important, how class and fracking intersects. And so, yeah, I think it's important to value the individual over the business, and I think we need to acknowledge that when we're silencing people, when companies are silencing people and they're putting gag orders on cases, when they're giving hush money to people who have gone through experiences, negative experiences with fracking, I think we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge the privilege, the class privilege that these companies have, and how they're exercising it against marginalized groups, and how they're using their power as just a way to oppress these people. But yeah.
So does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask at this time? We have some questions you don't yet. I'll come in and storm.
Hello, thank you everyone for being here, for your insights and your opinions. Just going back to this topic that kind of a couple of you touched on, the issue of class and income and all that. It's true that the issue of, at least the way I see it, the issue of fracking started to come to light when it started affecting white middle class people. But I think it has been affecting all kinds of people for a very long time. So I mean, if this is just if we can connect it back to the sense of environmental justice, yes, the people that we see first on the news, on the media, on the press are the white middle class people. But isn't there something that we should listen to there? Because it's actually a much deeper and widespread problem that we need to address. And how do we ensure that it's not only those people that are being whose problems are being addressed, but that the traditionally marginalized groups are also integrated into this conversation, and their problems that they probably have been having more deeply and for a longer period of time are also addressed as part of this process.
Thanks for that. I have recently come upon a new friend, Matthew Cotton, who's a scholar in England, and he is studying fracking reactions in England. And there, your point is apparently dramatized that the two areas of potential development or pending development in England, the north of England, where it's like Rust Belt cities and just very, very poor people of different ethnicities, some just white, but really in a bad situation, and they're concerned. And then the other part is southeast England, where it's a bunch of rich aristocrats. And they are just fumbling around apparently in England trying to think, how do you build a coalition on that? So there's a case of just two different groups, very different statuses of privilege, but trying to some way or another see if they can speak to each other and join together. So I think that's a remarkably interesting thing to watch. My most intense personal puzzlement comes from having been working in Greeley, Colorado, north of here, where there was a terrible immigration raid a number of years ago, and a bunch of children left without parents because the children were born in the United States, parents came back. Anyway, really has a tough history on race relations. Now there's Somali immigrants, so we go to Greeley and we have public forums on fracking, and then we go to lunch downtown and we see all these immigrant folks, and we don't see the immigrant folks at the fracking events, and that could be our fault and might well be our fault, but there's just something there where I just think visits and visits and visits to Greeley, and I don't know what a single Somali person thinks about fracking. I don't know if they have a margin to think about. Maybe they're under such difficult economic circumstances that there's really no margin for that. Anyway, if you can help me get smarter on this, I don't know, I'm too clumsy, I'm an awkward late middle-aged white person, so if I go up to a Somali person on the street really and say, hi, I'm Dr. Weebed, and could you tell me? I mean, I don't know how to do it. So I'm not a sociologist, and I'm not even sure that's the solution, but if we could chat about that sometime, I'd love to follow up on that.
Hi. I think the white people are just catching up. I think that the environmental movement, if you walk outside of the United States border and you go down to Latin America or you go to Africa, they've been fighting this stuff since the invention of the World Bank. I mean, this is an absolute algorithm of how this works. It just so happens that in the United States, the environmental movement tended to come along in the 70s, embrace direct action, which is a tactic not invented in the United States. But with fracking, fracking is one of those issues where it's like pulling on a loose thread of a sweater, and if you pull on it enough, the next thing you know, you're kind of just covered in shit. And that's how this stuff works. So for like Greeley, I'm sorry I swear a lot. It's a good habit. So, you know, like in Greeley, this is kind of the dynamic up there. And I've kind of dealt with these issues a bit. I was out at the big protest against the World Trade Organization in Seattle when we shut down the World Trade Organization in 1999, and these conversations took place ongoingly. This is how it kind of works, is you get working class communities that are forced into poverty to a greater extent if you are African American or Latino. And they're forced by the system into poverty. And then, of course, the system provides them the solution to getting out of that poverty. And the solution, of course, has to profit the corporations. So what you'll get is you'll get these communities that are economically desperate because of the system that they live in. And then you'll get the very same system that will propose to get them out of that pit that they created for them in the first place. So, Weld County, 22,000 oil and gas wells. Can you imagine the amount of material wealth taken out of Weld County? Billions of dollars. Weld County suffers from a 20% child poverty rate. How do you figure that out? So this entire idea that fracking is creating jobs for the working class and the poor and the disenfranchised and the marginalized is bullshit. Really what it is a system that is perpetuating itself. And the nice thing about your question is that it pulls at the fabric of the illegitimate system itself. And so when you deal with fracking, you inevitably have to deal with race, you have to deal with class. Because if you're going to fix the world, those two things can't be ignored.
I imagine that everyone in the audience, to a certain extent, experiences privilege and has got to enjoy privilege. And if you haven't in any way, then I am truly sorry. But I imagine that most of you have had in some way some sort of privilege. Imagine, just think about with that privilege, how hard it's been for you, and especially your peers who aren't here today, to get interested in environmental issues and to become autonomous within the society we live in today, to feel like they have power to change the world around them and to overcome personal issues, to look outside themselves. And now imagine that you're in a frontline community and your community is being fracked, and how hard it would be to get involved then. Really hard, I would think. So I agree that we live in a system that makes it very hard to get involved, but luckily we are seeing more and more community involvement, political engagement, and grassroots movement around stuff like fracking, which is extremely inspiring to see.
Just a very brief comment. To me, fracking is one of the scariest issues of our time, and of course part of that is that it's personal. I can wrap my hands around it and I can see it all around me. But to me there is this little blessing in it, which is the fact that it is affecting everybody. I feel like the fact that it is affecting all classes it's about damn time that we have to deal with it, that we all have to deal with it. And so I do see it as an opportunity for working interculturally, although I have to say, completely honestly, we have not fully figured out how to engage different communities, because you have to be really careful not to go in and be like, here's what you need to do. No, that's not how it works. It has to be conversations and finding out in what ways is it impacting different cultures, and we're definitely working on creating these ties, but I invite, if anybody in this room has any ideas, please come talk to us, because it's something that we need to get better at, and in any movement, when you create those ties, your movement is just exponentially more powerful. So yeah, we're open to any suggestions you guys have got.
Those questions. There's a little stack of papers there with those questions.
Oh, these are the surveys.
Oh, surveys. Oh.
Yeah. By the way, guys, if you have received, it looks like you guys have received the surveys, please fill those out so we can have good advice on how we can continue with our events in the future. But back to the discussion.
Hello. I want to thank Heather for inviting me tonight because I'm so excited to see you guys here. All right. I think that what we're trying... Can I talk without this? Is it okay?
Okay, can you guys hear?
You're recording too,
Oh,
so
okay.
it might...
So you're touching on Latin America and all of these people. We're just catching up to this discussion that's been happening without us, pretty much. Without our consent, without our knowledge. We've had accessibility to this information, but it's been limited. And now you're opening our eyes to the issue and you're bringing this tension to our attention. what it takes to create change is mass social movement, which we're learning in this class together right now, but you have to intrinsically motivate people. And it sounds like you have all of the intrinsic motivation. You're telling people, this is going to help your health, this is your welfare, these are the things that the government really should be protecting in the first place. But I think, this idea of home rule really excites me, because what we're doing then is taking the power of the government to disenfranchise us and to make each individual voice not count because the bureaucratic process is bullshit. We're taking that and we're breaking it down. We're decentralizing this decision and we're making the process closer to home. And I think that's what it's going to take to change anything. And I think because, this is pointing to inequality and it's saying, well, why is it that there's only these white middle class? Or, it's not about that. I think we're all coming to this level where we're saying, we don't look at people based on skin color or religion or sex or any of that anymore. We don't believe in those things. What we believe in is this pursuit of our rights that we've supposedly been promised, but that aren't being delivered. And I think that the way you guys can gain support for this, the way you can build knowledge, is simply by making this information more accessible. And I think by organizing people and saying, let's go and actively perform civil disobedience more frequently. Let's protest, but let's make this information. I was on this think tank funding article the other day looking at how foreign governments are funding our think tanks that are deciding our policy, that are protecting these corporations, that are protecting these interests. And as much as we think it's like just our domestic interest, it's actually a much more complicated international affairs kind of thing. And it's really complex, and I love that you took the complexity pill, because in class, I'm the person who took that pill, and I try to explain things to people, and they're like, there's so much. But it really is like, and we're taking this massive information, and now we have a decision, and we have a choice, and we're being reminded of that, and that's where our power lies. And that's how we're taking power away from the government. And it's not the government necessarily that's bad. It's the fact that they're representing these corporate interests. Because writing a check means so much more than writing a letter these days.
I love the sentiment that you are professing. I wish that having the information distributed by itself was enough to make fracking not a human health concern currently in America. It's slightly troubling that when it seems to me, when the American government was informed about fracking, instead of thinking, how can we make sure this doesn't impact Americans from a human health standpoint, the first thing they thought was, how can we pretend that it doesn't? But because they know, they have done research and they have all the evidence. So I think it really comes down to a lot of the underlying emotional philosophical framework that supports the government. Like the Bolivian government, they have a statute giving the environment laws of its own, giving the world laws of its own. They're the only government in the world that has it like that currently. We have so much more power as a government. Why don't we have laws protecting the earth?
I had sat on the various, why would you invite a professor to a pleasant gathering like this? Because I brought with me two of the recent review articles, not by the government, but by scientists. And what I would love, and I don't know if anyone in the world, this even with joyful giant sandwiches, I'm not even sure if that would pull this off, but I would do anything I would certainly find sandwiches to supply. If we could read these two review articles, one just a month or two old, and the other from earlier in the year, Potential Public Health Hazards, Exposures and Health Effects from Unconventional Natural Gas Development, John Adgate, Bernard Goldstein, Lisa McKenzie, three of the most noted, often cited. Lisa McKenzie's study is often cited, and really, well, I won't be with this, but it's really just about how short we are on research, and we're short on research money, so we're not, if there's nothing that says, that's obviously a ridiculous thing to say that because these authors conclude that there is a world of uncertainty out there, to say that they do not feel they can definitively state causation. They can find correlation sometimes, association, which is not causation. But when they write their review article and say that we don't know much and we need more research, but we don't have enough money, that doesn't mean that there aren't risks. That doesn't mean that there aren't dangers and impacts. But it is kind of up for more inquiry. And I would just do it. I would buy pizzas. I would buy anything. If you would join me in reading these, and then the other really recent one, the environmental costs and benefits of fracking by scholars, at least one of whom is in this area. If we could just chat about this, and it's frustrating because you want the scientists to be definitive, and they can't, or at the very best they can speak in probabilities, which tell you nothing about any individual, or they're so varied by side, and you don't know which way the winds are blowing when you're looking at emissions. Anyway, I will, and I would bring David Baumgarten from Gunnison as well as part of, with the pizzas and the sandwiches and the articles. So just, and I don't know what you're supposed to do. Actually, one of the questions we were given is, what do you do when you don't have the knowledge you would like to have? How do you make decisions? So to contemplate these, and if you contemplate them, and if the majority of you say there are enough suggestions and concerns and questions raised that we should wait 20 years, that seems like a thought. But I guess I would like to have the discussion of these articles first, and then go into the, now what do we do that we can't, I'm being very ancient, as I've referred to several times now. When I was a kid, there were lots of ads on TV that had gentlemen in white coats who were playing doctors, and they were often saying things to us about how just a couple of these pills would make us happy. Well, some pills will do that, I guess. But anyway, so I just think, we hope, we still have that dream, whether you saw those ads or not, that dream that there are some people in lab coats who will say things definitively, and then we'll go, oh, now we know. I still have that dream, but these guys won't play they're not actors, they're actually scientists. So that's what we need, I guess, is some actors to play scientists on this. So anyway, so just if you do want to have an occasion in the future, Senate American West would host that, and we would get pizzas. They're not so healthy. Pizzas. No, not pizzas, not healthy. So I'm sure something more, well, better for you. Although not too much better.
Can you write the article titles on the board possibly?
Oh boy, they're very good titles.
Yeah, you send them to us too, we can send them out through
Okay.
email too.
Okay, yeah, they're multi-authored as the darn scientists often do that. So yeah, if you would offer, thank you so much.
Just real brief. Maybe because I've become a little obsessive about this issue. To me, there are actually a lot of studies out there. I mean, I see studies coming out, and you know, it's always hard to show causation, but to me, you know, I've read a lot of studies that, and also data that is just really clear. Like, so I think that we give so much power to scientists that we sometimes disempower ourselves. So like, for example, in 2013, there were 495 spills from fracking, and about 22% of those contaminated water. Okay, so that's like a basic fact that was reported on the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, Conservation Commission website that we all have access to, and it doesn't take a scientist to understand that, right? Another piece of information is just how much water it uses. You know, like 2 to 9 million, some people say 2 to 5 million, other people say million gallons per single frac, and each site can be fracked multiple times. And then tens of thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals, which are endocrine disrupting, cancer causing, and have effects on our neurological systems. So there's these basic things that that are undisputables about fracking, that to me, it's like, okay, get the information, please do the research. However, let's also use our common sense. Like, I feel like if you just spend a little bit of time, that you can get it. And at the very least, that we should be practicing the precautionary principle in our communities, where the impacts will be tens of thousands of years. And my fear about academia in general is that we get caught in the jargon and the debate and all of that stuff, and then we fail to take action, and then it's too late. And the thing about this industry is they get in and out. That's how they do it. That if you look at the past decade, you gotta go to Wells County. I mean, forget about reading a paper. You live next to one of the most fracked counties in the entire country. It's one of the epicenters. When you drive down there, I went there last week, it's startling to look at the horizon. I can taste and feel the air. It has a different consistency. It's frightening, and you realize that we're living in this bubble here, and the county over is being industrialized beyond your wildest dreams. And so I say go get an experience, because when you're touched like that, it's visceral. And then when we talk to each other about it, it's more than another statistic. And then when the radio has an ad from Cred, who is funded by the oil and gas industry and has an interest in making you believe something, you have a personal story, which I think is really important, that we all have an experience with this. And so we're also going to be doing Tour de Destruction, which is going to be led by an individual in Weld County who's going to take you to fracking sites. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up with me. We'll get you on a list and we'll invite you, and you can go in person and see what does it look like in a community. What would our future be like if we did this? And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, great. Sounds good.
So I have a couple of quick comments, and then I have a question I wanted to ask everybody on the panel. So one of the things that is directly tied to this issue is the atmospheric impacts. And just recently, I saw some pictures online from the space station, and they had taken photos of what they called methane hot zones. And there was a hot zone in the Four Corners area, which is Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. And then there's another one up in the Dakotas, which are two fairly main areas in the west where there's a lot of fracturing going on. So there's that direct tie to what are we doing, because, well, as far as I know, at this point, it hasn't been determined scientifically exactly what all of this release of methane from these pads are doing to the overall atmospheric conditions. So that's a concern that maybe fracturing groups should start addressing when they're talking to the public. The other thing I wanted to mention was I went to an oil and gas seminar this summer, and in fact I think it was at the law school. And one of the things that I remember distinctly about that, because there were oil and gas representatives there, and they were talking about within the industry associations, they're concerned about future prices on the market. And the oil and gas market, especially the natural gas market, is now becoming saturated with the amount of gas that's being produced by all the producers across the United States. And so, of course, some of this gas is now being transported and sold in foreign markets. But the big concern with the industry associations is the market price. And they're looking at selling it more and more in developing countries. And they're also looking at trying to figure out how to raise the natural gas prices in the United States, because the prices are being artificially, as far as they're concerned, artificially lowered right now because of the amount of producers. So as far as I can remember from that talk this summer, there was no talk in the industry associations about possibly trying to limit the amount of players in the market, but what they were more concerned with was future pricing, and then how to make U.S. citizens pay more for natural gas drilling that's going to continue in this country, and to find more markets to sell it abroad. So that might also be another thing that fracking groups could start addressing to the public is, gee, do you really want to be forced to pay more because there's so many players in it? They don't want to self-regulate, and they want to figure out how to make you pay more for it. And then right now, I just read this week that Alaska is now selling its natural gas and oil to Asia, and they're not selling it to the lower 48 states at all because they can't, it's just not fiscally viable for them. So they're just selling it straight to Asian markets. So my question is in terms of how this panel relates to communities of color. I've had these really conflicting opinions about fractioning. Part of me thinks, yes, we need to do this because we've got to figure out ways to provide energy for, the myriad of uses that we use it for, and increasing uses because the United States population doesn't seem to want to, cut back and reserve and use more frugally energy in this country. And so, the suppliers have to keep up with the demand. However, I also think about the issues of what's going on in the Middle East. And the United States still imports a lot of Middle East oil. We're still extremely vulnerable to sources in the Middle East. And the people who go over there and fight the wars and who are the ground troops and who have to deal with all the nastiness and on the ground are communities of color. They're the ones who, sign up and are in the Army, the Marines, the Navy, etc. They're the ones who are fighting for our, quote, interests, which is oil, and having the oil supplies available so that white people and other people in the United States can live the lives that they live here. And I think that the fractioning movement, if you really want to have an honest discussion with communities of color about what's going on and how it's impacted, and gee, how can we get you involved and interested and be on our side and buy into it, you need to start talking about the issues of, how do we decouple ourselves from the Middle East sources of energy, and the fact that there are so many people of color who are part of the armed forces in this country who are supporting our, quote, interests in the Middle East to have access to their oil. I think that's a really important question that needs to be addressed. I haven't heard one single panel or newspaper article or professor or anybody else ever talk about this. And frankly, if I lived in a poor community of color, I wouldn't even listen to you guys because my neighbors, my sons, my daughters, my cousins, blah, 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 they're having to join the Army because they don't have economic opportunities here, and they think by joining, the armed services and going abroad to the Middle East to help us have access to oil will give them opportunities here. So that's all I want to say.
I just want to say a couple of things in response to that I agree with you that the idea, I agree with you on many points, but one of them, that the exporting of natural gas and oil, and I think the terminals that were going to be importing liquid natural gas are now being fitted for exporting natural gas. I just think that is going to be an incredible escalation of the tensions around this issue. If we're selling gas to Japan and the profit is going directly to companies and it's raising the prices for American consumers, and it doesn't, how can that address our national security or energy security? So I think that's really under discussed, so I'm very glad that you said that. The methane leakage thing, the state does have new regulations on methane leakage. Since methane is natural gas, it is complete madness to let a valuable resource go into the air where it is a very potent greenhouse gas, and nobody denies that it's worse than CO2, and it's in the atmosphere for a shorter period of time, but it's very bad. So I think that's an absolutely crucial item. And then there has been, I'm a member of the board of a group called Energy Outreach Colorado, which helps low-income people with their heating costs, so they don't have to make those terrible choices about medicine and food or a warm house. And for a spell, and that may be shifting as prices change, but the low prices of natural gas have really helped some low-income people in a way that their pride does not get them willing to go in and apply for assistance. But the production of natural gas lowering the prices actually did relieve the burden, and whether that would last in this new regime, I don't know. But that's been an uncomfortable thing to see, that in fact, for the people who will not go apply for help because it's a matter of pride, but just the lowering of the prices actually did ease their circumstances a little bit.
Yeah, real quick on the economic question. There's a woman by the name of Deborah Rogers, who is an economist out of Texas. This woman is not a liberal, she's not a hippie or an anarchist or anything like that. She actually is an investment analyst. She actually used to work for Merrill Lynch. And she's got great talks online. It's Deborah Rogers, if you want to write it down. If you do a search for Deborah Rogers and fracking, you'll get an hour-long talk from Deborah Rogers. And what she'll say is that fracking is essentially a Ponzi scheme. Even quoting the head of, I think it was Chesapeake, or maybe it was Anadarko, Aubrey, who said that the real money in fracking isn't from drilling, it's actually from parlaying the mineral rights. You can buy and sell the mineral rights, and so the speculation on those mineral rights actually gives them more money than the drilling itself. All of this is enormously financed. It's on borrowed money that they're doing this kind of stuff. So when you look at this and you look at the response to communities trying to prohibit fracking within their neighborhoods, you have to understand that if this industry does not drill and drill fast, it runs out of money. So, that's one thing to consider. It's going to be a bubble, and most economists already know this, which is why it has to get pegged to the world price, the world market price for natural gas, which of course will drive the natural gas price in the United States up. But this is another one of those things where I think we have to question, why do we live in the richest society in human history, but the available jobs right now are to join the military and go to war? I mean, that begs the question, how does that work? Is that an accident? Does the market command that? Or is that a construct? One thing I did want to mention about the health studies. I'm a nurse. I understand the scientific method. I understand how this stuff works. I've gone through this stuff. We even did a pilot study out in Erie, taking blood samples from people in Erie, Colorado, which is right next door to Lafayette. Every single test subject in Erie came back with levels of ethylbenzene in their blood at the 98th percentile. Utterly toxic levels of ethylbenzene. You should have 0 ethylbenzene in your blood, by the way. Ethylbenzene is the product of burning benzene. When you burn benzene, like they do at every single one of these well pads, you create ethylbenzene. It's being concentrated into people's blood. Here's the problem. It's not the health. It's not a health issue. So a lot of folks might not know this. How many people here have ever heard of the Alamosa mine disaster? All right, awesome. When you get into the central part of the state, every hand in the crowd goes up. What happened in the 1990s was that the use of cyanide was being used industrial and gold mining. They were using it to leach the gold out of the ore. And at one of these mines, the Summitville mine, one of the tailings ponds broke. And it released all of this liquid industrial waste into the Alamosa River. It killed 17 miles of the Alamosa River. There was a response to that, and Gunnison County was actually one of them. There was 5 Colorado counties that banned the use of cyanide in gold mining. What do you think happened with those counties? Well, they all got sued. They all got sued by the Colorado Mining Association, and the Colorado Supreme Court in 2009 said you can't ban cyanide use in gold mining because it's an important part of the industrial process, and guess what? Mining is overseen by the state, so you have no local rights. Home rule, you don't have the rights. You go through home rule to start attacking that corporate law, But how many people here feel that cyanide is safe? Are there any chemistry professors here? Well, we all know that cyanide is toxic. We've known that for 150 years. So the question isn't even, is it safe? Because even if we prove that it's not safe, the law that forces it on us is still there. I want to say one thing. I've kind of passed out the state ballot initiative that the Colorado Community Rights Network is going to be putting back into play in 2015. I'll tell you this, that the CEO of the Colorado Petroleum Association said, and I know this because he said it to my mom, who was a Lafayette City Councilor. He didn't know she was my mom. He said, of all the ballot initiatives out there that are dealing with oil and gas, this is the one you've got to worry about. Because this is the one that actually brings power down to communities and hits us in the nerve. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there because we have to approach this scientifically. We have to approach this from the perspective of economics. But ultimately, if we want to deal with this issue, at some point, it's going to become a civil liberties question. And if you're interested in that ballot initiative or anything like that, you can see me after the forum. Also, our website here, if you can see it over my head, it's cocrn.org. There's a little place on there. And it talks more about all of the law that forces this stuff onto communities. It goes on and on and on. Another issue, and getting back to economics, is you can't invoke a living wage in Colorado higher than the state minimum wage. So if we wanted to get $15 an hour for working class communities, we would have to fight for this state ballot initiative in the process of getting a living wage. You can't make this stuff up. Thanks.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Why don't we go with the gentleman over here in the hat? And who else? I'll come over to you.
I appreciate the last questions. My name is Rick Casey. I live in Lafayette. I worked with Cliff Wilming to pass the Lafayette Community Rights Act in 2013. And I don't want to just hijack the conversation here just for my own benefit. I know I'm here to contribute to the discussion. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, how many people are here because they're required to be here for a class? So the rest of you here out of personal interest, right? So how many of you here have heard of the Halliburton loophole? Okay, so a lot of people here need to know about the Halliburton loophole. The fracking industry would not exist if the Halliburton loophole did not exist. The Halliburton loophole is a short clause in the very large 2005 Energy Policy Act that was passed before fracking became such an issue. And I've been teaching environmental economics